President Biden made an unannounced stop in Kyiv today, meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Biden offered more help as Ukraine's war with Russia now nears the start of a second year. Steve Harrigan is in Kyiv with more.
In a defiant display of solidarity, President Biden making a surprise stop in Kyiv, Ukraine, on his way to Warsaw, Poland, to mark the February 24th anniversary of the invasion by Russia. The president sharing this powerful message.
You're succeeding against all and every expectation except your own. We have every confidence that you're going to continue to prevail.
To help the Ukrainians triumph, the U.S. authorizing another $500 million in military aid.
That announcement includes artillery ammunition for HIMARS and howitzers, more javelins, anti-armor systems, air surveillance radars to help protect Ukrainian people from aerial bombardments.
Such an important package is an unmistakable signal that Russian revenge attempts will have no chance, and together we will protect our Ukrainian cities and our people from Russian terror.
President Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spending about 5 hours together, holding talks about next steps in what Biden called a brutal and unjust war, laying wreaths and holding a moment of silence for thousands of Ukrainian soldiers killed since 2014, and reiterating the U.S.'s commitment in the palace's guest book, closing his comments with "Glory to Ukraine."
I can tell you for sure our intelligence community is tracking closely reflections in Russia, how Vladimir Putin views this visit.
White House officials said they notified Russia of the visit several hours in advance. In Kyiv, Steve Harrigan, Fox 32 Chicago.
And we are joined now by William Muck. He's an international relations expert. He's also professor of poli-sci at North Central College. Professor Muck, always good to have you on the program. Thank you.
Good to chat with y'all.
Okay, so let me start off by asking you about the big picture assessment here. We just heard the president say to the Ukrainian public that you are defying all expectations except for your own. Is that accurate? Who's winning? Who's losing 1 year in?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think if you look at this from the Russian perspective, the war the last year has been just a disaster. Russia hoped to take the capital quickly and has had one failure after another. So, you know, I think you absolutely look and say that Ukraine is winning, but we're really moving to the next stage. We're at the calm before the storm. So we're likely to see some major movement over the next couple weeks. Russia's going to begin its offensive. Ukraine is likely to engage in a counteroffensive. So I think over the next month, we're going to learn a lot more about what the future will hold for this conflict. But I think a year in, Ukraine has to be sitting back and saying they're very happy with what has happened. I think the Biden administration has to feel very, very good about the way in which they've handled the last year of diplomacy.
So the U.S. has spent $62.3 billion on this war. I mean, that's a lot of money. You talk to anybody out on the streets and they feel like the money could be better spent domestically. Obviously, it's making a difference, but is American security really at risk? Is that why we're spending all this money?
There's a couple issues at play here. One is democracy, right? So Biden has been very clear that this isn't just about Ukraine. It's about the future of democracy and the nature of the international system. And you're absolutely right to say that the United States is spending just a dramatic amount. But when we think about the broader U.S. defense budget, which is roughly $600 to $700 billion, it's a relatively small amount. And I think we also have to think about the context that the United States, with that support and with the Ukrainians of fighting, have been able to absolutely devastate the Russian military. So if you would have said a year ago that for, I don't know, 5 or 6% of the U.S. military budget, you could cut the Russian military budget in half, I think most Americans would accept that. I mean, certainly there are political dynamics to it, but when we step back, I think it's been a pretty effective approach by the United States.
Now, as tensions have flared over the months between these two nations, Russia being a nuclear power, and there being concern, at least in the public discourse, about the possibility of this war not only expanding beyond the borders of Ukraine, but also the possibility of nuclear war. What's your assessment of that in terms of that being a realistic concern 1 year in?
I think the good news is that Vladimir Putin is not openly talking about nuclear weapons anymore, right? That rhetoric has calmed down a little bit. And I think the reason for that is Russia feels fairly safe, right? That the fighting has been contained to Ukraine and there's been no fighting in Russia itself, or very limited fighting. Now, that could fundamentally change if Ukraine carries out an offensive and is able to take back territory. And if they're starting to talk about taking the Crimean Peninsula, that could fundamentally change. As I think Vladimir Putin's red line is any kind of fighting in Russia proper proper. And so if that dynamic starts to occur, I think we should expect that Russia will again start using that nuclear saber. Now, whether they would use it or not, it's a little bit more difficult, but I think for the moment it's calm, but we'll see once this next stage of fighting erupts.
All right, Professor Muck, thank you so much for joining us. You always do such a great job of breaking this down in layman's terms for us.
Thanks for having me.